On. All right. I got the name wrong. It's New York Comic Con. I just love New York City. Sorry about that. Anyways, I'm Jordan Zachert. I'm here for SYFY WIRE. I'm the features editor, and I'm with Joe Casey, a man who has written many, many comic books, Marvel, DC. He's written all the characters, basically. And we're here to talk about the ultimate mythic figure, Jesus.
Yeah, the ultimate superhero. I agree with that.
He's got this book out. Well, it's coming out in March, but you can get a copy, I think a preview at the Image
This is the first hit, the Ash Can preview here at the show, exclusive.
If you want to take a look, show it to the people. It's a book called Jesusfreak, and I assume this is based closely on the word of the Holy Bible.
No, I never really looked at the Bible to come up with this story. This is that period of Jesus' life that no one really knows about, never really talked about. You know, if he existed, that is. You know,
sure.
We're not here to say one way or the other.
Look, it's not for us to say. But if he did, he would be a vigilante of sorts.
Well, he'd have some skills, some mad fighting skills, and we show that in the book.
Yeah, why don't you set it up for us? Tell us what goes on in the book. What's the premise?
Well, I'll give you the pitch that gets me in the least amount of trouble.
I like trouble, personally.
I don't want any trouble.
All right.
And there could be a lot of it where this book is concerned. It's about a young Nazarene carpenter trying to find his way in a very violent world. A lot of upheaval in first century Israel. And he's a little different. He doesn't quite know why yet, but he's figuring it out. It's the journey that he goes on where he gets a sense that he might be a little bit more than your average guy.
Yeah, it was a very unjust time, and that kind of sets it up.
Completely, which I think we can relate to.
Absolutely. Yeah, more than... If you don't want to get yourself in trouble, maybe don't go down that path.
You're right. Never mind. Next question.
He does, within the first few pages of this preview, cut a guy's head off.
As you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Back then, that was part of the course.
There's a lot of Roman soldiers with swords, and sometimes you got to fight fire with fire. So
Sure.
He does what he's got to do.
Where did the idea come from?
Well, I've done a lot of comics in my day, and I've done a lot of work for Marvel. I worked on the X-Men for a couple years, went over to DC, worked on Superman for a couple years, done a lot of superhero comics. But I also had this other side of my career, which is doing a lot of creator-owned comics at Image, and those bounce all around different genres. So I wanted to do something that was, I guess you could classify it as historical fiction, something that require a lot of research, and something where I'd have to go digging for the research. And again, the idea of the historical Jesus, the actual man that might have existed, there's some research, there's been some things written about him and how he might have lived and what that life might have been like. So going deep into that research interested me. Then working with the artist, a genius named Benjamin Mara, we have a shared sensibility of old 70s pulp comics. And we wanted to fuse that with my research-intensive thing and come up with something that was satisfied me on a literary level, but satisfied the both of us on a very visceral action comic level.
So what did you find out as you're researching about this kind of untold period of Jesus' life that really struck a chord with you and made you want to go further with the project?
Well, it was most of the research was about the time period and what it was like to live in that time period and what was going on at that time, politically, socially. I think in the historical sense, the idea of a guy coming forth and having a certain belief system that was against the power structure at the time, that was a life and death scenario. I mean, the stakes are incredibly high if you're going to go out there and talk about something that the government doesn't want you to talk about. And in fact, the penalty is death. But he does it anyway. So that's a heroic journey to me. That's a guy who stands up for what he believes in and what he's trying to figure out for himself and for other people. And we thought it would make for a good comic. I mean, that's the other side of it, is that a story like this, it's meant to show that comic books are the greatest storytelling medium out there. They can tell any kind of story. They can do anything you want them to do, as long as you're willing to put in the time and the energy and the effort. And that's what a book like this represents, hopefully.
You, like you said, you wrote Superman for a number of years, and there's an element of Messiah-dom to him.
Definitely.
And so writing the actual, for some people, the Messiah, is there a difference there? Or when you were writing Jesus, did you think back to your Superman times?
There's a big difference. I mean, when I wrote Superman, he was very self-aware, as he should be. He knows who he is, he knows what he is, he knows what he means to people. In the book, the character of Jesus is still figuring it out. I mean, in comic book terms, it's more like treating the character as an emerging mutant. Although in the case of this story, there's no Professor X that wheels up and says, hey, come to my school and everything will be okay.
Right. And so this book got announced, I think it was in August, right? Something like that?
March of next year.
Okay. Oh, no, it was announced, though, earlier this year.
Yeah.
Without people not knowing what it was really about, right? You gave them a little preview when the release first came out.
Right.
Did you get some eyebrows, some confusion, some not so nice letters?
Surprisingly, no. I was prepared for a section of the audience or just a section of the public to see this and just go nuts. As they often do when they have no idea what it's about, they just see like an image or hear a name and they go crazy. That hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping it doesn't happen. I don't need that headache in my life, but we're prepared for it. The thing is, both Mara and I very much want to let people know we're not scholars, we're storytellers. We're not trying to get something over on anybody. We're telling a story. And it's the same as any historical fiction. It takes something that was real or could have been real, adds dramatic elements to it, so it's entertaining for an audience. That's all we care about, is just entertaining an audience. Everything else is, another great thing about comics is it's a very interactive medium. It's what the reader brings to it. So a lot of it is up to the reader. What they bring to this story is what they're going to bring to it.
You mentioned the sort of 70s pulp look of it, and it's really cool the way it looks like a 70s comic, kind of like a 70s movie in some ways. So who were the visual influences on this book?
Well, a lot of the non-superhero 70s comics. Marvel Comics in particular put out a lot of, horror comics, kung fu comics, monster comics. That sort of left of center, but still mainstream. You could still buy them in 7-Eleven. You could buy them at your local convenience store. Those are a big influence on us because we just like the fact that those things existed. That when I was 6 years old, I could go into the Quick Sack and buy Master of Kung Fu just right there in the rack, which was some intense comics for its time. But it was a big deal that they were just as accessible as Spider-Man or Captain America or anything else that was in that spinner rack.
You talk about that old school style. You even have some parodies of old ads in this thing.
Yeah, I want to be clear. The ash can, we wanted to do something that was its own experience.
Got it.
The book is much more, it's much more straight. We're not making a joke out of anything. We're telling a story that we want to tell. It's meant to be something for the bookstores. This is something that we just did kind of for fun. And as you can see, we had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, it's a very good way to promote it. And so you have done so much Marvel stuff. You've done DC, Image Comics, creator-owned stuff. What does like your daily or weekly schedule look like as you're writing for so many different titles?
Well, I'm also, my company, Man of Action, is big in animation.
Sure.
We do a show called Ben 10, which we created. So we work on that show. We have about 5 others, including the new Mega Man show. There's a show on Netflix called Zack Storm that we created, and things that we can't even talk about here. So that's become the day job. Comics used to be my day job, and now the animation thing has taken over. So the comic book thing, it's almost like I'm, 12 years old again, having to go to school and then come home and draw my stupid little comics. Only now those stupid little comics get the hardcover edition that comes out in bookstores all across America.
It's pretty cool that your now hobby, it brings you to Comic-Con to talk about it and get published.
Back to being a hobby again. I can't believe it.
Has that changed the way you approach creating comics now that it's become kind of a hobby in a way?
Well, it's nice when something that you love, you're not dependent on it to pay the rent. Then you can really bring all your love to it and not have the pressures of, oh, I gotta hit these deadlines. And when I was working at Marvel and DC, it was my full-time job, and I loved it, but it was a job. I get to treat it as a job. Now I have a different job, so I can go back to doing something for the love of the game, which for me, that's what comics should be.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine when you work at a place like Marvel and DC, you're churning and churning and churning.
And it's great, but that can burn you out after a while. I mean, I worked at those companies for many years, and I still love those characters, I still love those companies, but you have to evolve if you're gonna, just to live your life, your career has to evolve, hopefully.
And so, a book like this, I don't know how long you wanted to tell this story. Are there other stories that you really want to tell that maybe you can do in your free time?
Yes, and luckily, because my relationship with Image Comics means that I'll be able to tell all of them as they come. That's how I've been doing it for probably the past 10 years, and I don't see any reason to stop. I love comic books, I love making them, and they give me the chance to do it, so I'll just keep doing it.
Would there be any characters that would draw you back to the big houses to write?
Sorry, what?
Would there be any characters that you would want to go from Marvel or DC that you'd want to take over at this point?
Well, there's always that thing that could always pull me back. I'm a big fan of the Avengers from when I was a little kid. So anything that has to do with that, if they called up and said, hey, I would definitely listen. But I've kind of written everybody else that I've ever wanted. I never even thought that I would get to the opportunity to write Superman or the X-Men. So it's exceeded my wildest dreams already. So now I've just got to figure out, what else is there to do that I didn't even think of when I was a kid.
That's a really good problem to have.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Thanks so much, Joe. Coming up next, Kieran Gillen and Stephanie Hands talk the RPG comic, horror comic, Die. So stick around. The Sci-Fi Wire live stage will continue. Use hashtag NYCC and hashtag is a fan thing. Thanks so much, Joe.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm Jackie Jennings with Sci-Fi Wire. If you can't get enough of New York Comic Con, go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube channel for news, interviews, cosplay, and so much more. What are you waiting for?